Today's video, we're going to be working on this AC. This video is going to deal specifically with working on an AC service call beginning to end and how to troubleshoot. The first thing I want to do when I'm coming to look at a unit, here I look at the condensing unit. You can see my disconnect is plugged in. I do see that I do have voltage coming from my contactor because my fan motor is on. I'm going to remove my side panel, and this will give me access to my contactor and my capacitor. You can see here the fan motor just turned off. The reason that happened is because the thermostat is no longer sending a signal to my contactor to engage. First thing I always tell my guys when they're working on any AC condensing unit is to come to the side panel and press the contactor. You can see that as soon as I engage the contactor, my system does turn on. I'm going to pull my disconnect. My thermostat right now is on to cool and auto, and I did lower the temperature to 75. I want to do at this point is I want to see if my compressor is overheated, and here I just have my temp gun, and what I like to do is oftentimes just take the temperature of the fan motor. The fan motor is 112 degrees while it was running, and the compressor is reading 120 degrees. Whenever your fan motor overheats or fails, or your compressor fails, you'll know because you'll take the temperature. Obviously it'll range depending on the ambient temperature. I've seen them go up anywhere up to 200 while it was overheated. Right now we're at 115 degrees. This is just the ambient temperature outside. I have my multimeter set to voltage, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the low voltage reading on my contactor. And you can see here I have 24 volts. I'm going to plug my disconnect back in, and I'm going to take my high voltage reading on my contactor. As you can see here, again my fan motor turned on. Bottom of my contactor, that's my incoming voltage coming from my disconnect, and right now I have 240 volts. Here my contactor is engaged. That's telling me that it is calling for cool, and I have my leads going to the top of the contactor, and that's going to be sending power to my compressor, and here I have 240 volts. So at this point I know just of doing my testing that I do have a low voltage reading. I do have 240 volts coming in, 240 volts going back out to my compressor. Here I connected my gauges. This is my low and my high side. Pretty much I'm going to look at my meters, and my meters right now tell me that I do have refrigerant or pressure inside of the compressor. It's in the retard position. That just simply tells me that I do have refrigerant, but the compressor is not running. I'm going to remove my low side, and you can see that I have no pressure right now. I'm going to remove my high side. Right now I know I have refrigerant in the system. I know I have 240 volts going to my condensing unit. I do have 240 volts going back to my compressor. I do have 24 volt, the low voltage, engaging from my thermostat when it's calling for cool, and right now my fan motor is running. So at this point I would suggest that the capacitor needs to be replaced. Right now I'm going to replace my capacitor. Just make sure whatever capacitor you purchase, that you purchase the same MFDs in accordance with the system that you have. We're going to pull all disconnect. This will remove power to my condensing unit. Channel, I do show you how to remove and replace your capacitor, including the wiring. But here you can see this is the capacitor I removed, and you can see that some sort of bug got into the terminal. This is possibly what caused the capacitor to fail. Right now I do have my contactor engaged because my thermostat is calling for cool. The thermostat is set to auto cool. I put the temperature down to 75. you could take your low voltage reading, and you can see here that I do have 24 volts. Obviously, we're taking a reading for the voltage coming from my disconnect, and I do not have any voltage because I removed the disconnect. I'm going to reattach my gauges. Right now I'm putting in my low side, and you'll see my needle will move on my gauges. That's my low side, my high side. Plug in my disconnect. That will send 240 volts to my contactor. Once the contactor here, it's already engaged, calling for 24 volts from the thermostat. That will send 240 volts up to the contactor to my compressor. And as soon as I put this disconnect in, the system should start up right away. You'll know because you'll see once I plug in my disconnect, the gauges on the reading on my gauges will start to equalize, and you'll get the reading of the system. Now my gauges are telling me that my compressor is running. Obviously you can put your hand here. I do feel the hot air blowing back at me. And again, this is the same procedure that I always tell my guys to do on every service call. There may be a time where you may come, your contactor may not be engaged because the thermostat's not set. You'll press the contactor. You'll want to see if your fan motor and your compressor turn on. If they turn on, then you know that the problem is going to be sending the voltage back to the condensing unit. It's usually going to be the low voltage. If you have, let's say, another scenario, you come here, you press your contactor, and your fan motor doesn't start, but you hear the compressor, obviously you know that your fan motor is going to be the issue. It may be your capacitor. This is a dual capacitor, and you can see here the brown wire that's coming in, that's for your fan. Sometimes the capacitor fails. Your compressor will still run, but your fan motor won't, so you have to replace the capacitor. Or you may have two separate capacitors. You may have one capacitor up top, you may have one capacitor sitting in the box somewhere up down here or somewhere up there. So basically the whole situation is based on, you know, what the problem is initially when you encounter an AC call. I always repeat the same process to my guys. When you come, make sure you have your multimeter, make sure you have your gauges. Plug your gauges in. That will tell you if you have refrigerant in the system. Come over here, make sure that your disconnect is in. Open up your panel, check the low voltage, check the high voltage, and then from there you'll be able to isolate where the problem is. If this video was a help, if it was informational, please subscribe.